what would an Eduardo Escobar trade with the Mets look like? This goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the show, because the Mets now have Lindor and Correa on the left side. They just signed Danny Mendick, who's kind of a second baseman. They have Luis Guillorme, who's a utility guy. They've got Jeff McNeil and Pete Alonso signed through next year. They have Mark Canha and Eduardo Escobar signed through this year, at least with team options for next year. So they're kind of flush with these cornerbacks. And Escobar's a quality player. He's kind of like what we hoped Jeimer Candelario would be, like a 2 to 3 win player, walks, hits from both sides, some little bit of defensive versatility. I wonder if they'd be less inclined to trade him than they would to be like Vientos or Ronnie Mauricio, like Raj mentioned in his article, because supposedly Escobar is a very big clubhouse guy. Like, people love him, and he's a kind of a team leader. And he has that versatility that you can play him in all 4 corners and also at second base, I think. And he's a switch hitter. But if they do want to trade him, the Mets right now have little in the way of outfield depth. They have 4 outfielders on their 40-man roster. And one of them is Khalil Lee, who I don't think has very much big league experience at all. And the one thing we talked about earlier is that rotation is awfully old, and they're going to get injured. You got Carrasco in there, you got Jose Quintana in there, you've got Verlander and Scherzer, who they're horses, but they also have been breaking down a little bit over the last couple of years. I mean, even Verlander missed a couple starts in the last season, right? Mm. So they could probably use some pitching depth. Either, I mean, in my trade, I had them getting Wilmer Flores. Who I'm sure the Tigers don't want to trade for Eduardo Escobar, but they probably part with him for a hitting prospect. But in my mind, he and Raj mentioned Ty Madden. You've got some pitchers who are in the upper minors now who wouldn't have to be on the 40-man roster, but would theoretically be close enough to help if they were, called upon. So maybe something like that. Maybe a Reese Olson or a Ty Madden to get the job done. I don't know. It depends on what the Mets are looking for. Who the hell knows what Steve Cohen wants?
Do we think Vientos is a player? I mean, is he a everyday third baseman?
Yeah, I personally think Vientos has the ability to. The fact that he can play first and third, I think he's shown his numbers too in Syracuse in terms of even getting walking and what have you. I think he's a regular. Whether he's a 2 regular, I don't know, but I think he has. I think he has enough ability there to be a effective major league player. I think again for what the Tigers want for him in terms of even keeping him for a couple of years. I mean, for his age too. I mean, you look at for what he's able to do at his age, it's something to consider, because he's a 2nd round draft pick, and he was I'm trying to remember if I can find the information. Remember, it's just his age stuck out to me. That's the only thing I remember about. Yeah, he's 23. He's already in the major leagues.
I think he was one of the youngest players in that draft. Yeah, I mean, I think defense is kind of his weakness. At least it has been historically. They've tried him in left field,
right?
Yeah, and guys can get better on defense. It's you're limited by your physical tools at some point. But he might be more of a first baseman than a third baseman. But
I was looking at Alex Ramirez, the outfielder.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That would be a player I think that would interest me if Eduardo Rodriguez was going to the Mets.
Yeah. What about
they need that outfield? Something in the pipeline coming.
Yeah. What about Kevin Pareda? Is that how you say his last name?
The catcher from Georgia Tech.
Because they do have Francisco Alvarez, so I'm thinking maybe he would be blocked by him.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of one of the more surprising draft picks. I remember last year when we did the draft show, like, oh, Parada. So we were like, oh, okay, the Tigers can take one of the 2 guys we wanted. They didn't take the guy I wanted, but yeah, I mean. It wouldn't shock me if they're like, all right, cool, the guy we just drafted, who cares? But he's another guy that I'm not entirely sure that he's going to stick at catcher. Sometimes that can be a little bit iffy, right? Where you want to see these guys in pro ball for a little while before you know that they're catching. But he was a great hitter at Georgia Tech. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there are options for the Tigers to trade to the Mets, but if the Mets wanted to trade Eduardo Escobar, I don't know exactly what the Tigers would give them. Or if the Tigers would really be interested in him, because again, he's an older guy who's basically got 2 years in this deal.